send me your available dates. I'm like, whatever. It really,
Oh, okay.
honestly, it's probably better if she tells me her schedule.
Okay.
And
Oh,
I'll be
we'll
like,
do that then, cause
Yeah.
then she can, so she did that, Google class for everyone, and then she moved to Egypt, which is fine, cause she's fully remote. But it's just like,
well, different time
Yeah,
zones and stuff
so-
now.
it's been a little weird trying to schedule.
That's fine. But great,
I mean-
so how does that? Yeah, time zones.
And the cost of living is so cheap, I'm like, yeah,
It's Egypt.
you're in the Middle East,
Yeah.
but.
Hey, Julie, can you hear me?
How are ya?
Good. Bear with me. I gotta run and get a charger. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Go next door.
Do you have a Dell?
Yeah, Cardinals.
I'll say Abigail's too. We, all three of us do. He probably has a Mac. I can't.
Hello, I'm Angie from Fidelity.
Hi, I'm Brady Lee. Nice to meet you.
Oh my gosh, now I'm cold.
I know, I was all like toasty and
How are you? Good.
So this is the stuff I need to look over and see if I need to like revamp something, because I get stuck in that, like, okay, it's done.
yeah, see, this is all
But
I've
then
done.
I look at it and it's like, okay, this isn't relative anymore. Some of it's like not relative, or
So I need to do a paper like you, because I just actually took another class through NAR and got certified. So this is all I put in my packet.
I don't even do that.
That's all I do.
Actually, yeah, I do.
I think you did, yeah, you do.
That's what I'm saying, like, I get so. Yeah, I think I have a section of,
And then I'm like,
I think I have a section that has that. Client testimonies, yeah, I do. Yes, I do.
I
Yeah,
think you're the one that told me about it.
yeah. I mean, Susan, I can give you my packet, you just have to redo it. And like, not redo it, if I can give it to you, yeah, but you just gotta change your face. I don't really care. But- Sure, at the time, but whatever, you don't care. So I'm gonna ask. Just. There's my- So let's. What does it say? Experience next to. It's by my health and standing. You might have to be that on a regular basis. This internalizing.
Bear with me just a few more minutes, everybody.
That is great. Actually, I think it's great. So I need to do that papers.
Yeah, I do have a resume, sort of, just a non-traditional resume. That's cute.
It's like,
A little baby back. Yeah, that's so cute.
oh, please. Oh, I wanted to wrap this for you to try.
Oh, that is a chunk.
I never had that before. I got that sand. Like it comes in with that and the one I just ate.
I know, I need to get back on track.
Well, I'm not. I do this and. Yes.
I don't do it. They might be bad. I gained like my. Actually, no, I didn't. And then I was.
Says almost every, nobody has computers. Let me see what I can get up on the screen here.
I was in my kid, was my grandkid. But like.
See, and I don't have that, I don't. see it in there.
You're right.
I should do something more productive than what I do. But
And I got you this, which is. That's very good.
Well, the week before Christmas, I could.
Oh.
Yeah.
My
So
problem is food.
I was over by Christmas.
Congratulations.
I feel like a
That's
part of the
awesome.
crowd now.
You are
Yeah.
now-
Yeah, I know. Like a big girl. I couldn't taste, which was the worst part. So I'm cooking and not able to taste, and that's horrible.
If I feel eat all day, I feel.
Hello, everybody. Bear with me just un momento. Getting everything together here. Trying to work out a television. Well, why would there be a remote with no batteries in it?
Wow.
Who would set me up for failure like that? That is horrible.
Useless remote. Yeah, I haven't taken this stuff. I haven't ate it. Yeah. Just 'cause I'm not-
Okay, everybody, sound check. Can you hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
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 Okay, excellent. Thank you. Trying to turn up my volume so I can hear you guys.
You're paranoid. Yeah.
Okay, here we are, getting ready to get started. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to show up. Hello, John Cummings. Hello, Julie Williams and company. I don't know who you have up there. Hey, Kim. Hey, Holly. Hey, John Wilson. Hey, MJ. What's up, Lori? Becky. Hey, Carolyn. And we have a little turnout here. Kristen Murray showing up. Okay. So we have a special guest today to add a little bit of color commentary to our contract discussion. Angie Shaw showing up from Fidelis to talk about how what we do influences our agreement, right? So this is important stuff. Let me get down here and do a quick share screen. Has anyone sat in on my contract how-tos before? I got one, yes. I got two, yes. You joined online.
Yes.
Week for pages 3 up. And how about at home?
Yes.
Yes. And what
Several
is
times.
the most fabulous resource that I'm always going to tell you to go to?
The consumer guide.
The consumer guide is one, and that's what we're going to send to our clients so that they know we're not lying to them. What's the other resource that we're going to use for our own personal knowledge?
R,
We're gonna use the guidelines for preparation and use. Right? Can anybody tell me where you're gonna find the guidelines for preparation and use for, specifically in this case, the standard agreement of sale?
PAR.
Website for PAR. It's bookmarked. That's exactly what I wanted to hear about. It's bookmarked. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. I appreciate that. So parealtors.org. PA Realtors, that's for all of us, not just one of us. It's parealtors.org. And whenever you go in there, has anyone not logged in before? If you have not logged in before, what information do you need to log into the most fabulous and comprehensive resource available to you today? Your NERDS number. Where do you find your NERDS number?
Your Realtor magazine.
It's in your phone. Excellent, man. We're batting it out of the park. It's bookmarked on your desktop. You have your NERDS number in your phone. That's what I want to see is you guys keeping this information at your arm's reach so that you can get there and use it. If you don't have it, when you go to log in, it's gonna say, don't know my NERDS number, and it'll take you to where you need to get it. Also on your Realtor magazine that comes in the mail, it's if you still get a paper copy, the mailing label has your NERDS number on it. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So I like the paper copy too. You can sit in doctor's office waiting rooms and people will start conversations with you and stuff. So go there for your guidelines for preparation and use. I advise you to read it often. Almost every January, there's going to be some changes to the agreement of sale. They haven't been issued yet for 2024, but I would anticipate to see some changes to the agreement of sale and a host of other documents. Last January, they made changes to 8 of our standard agreements. You're like, we have 8? Yeah, we do. So, you're gonna find guidelines for preparation and use of other important forms. Almost every single one of them has a guideline. Some of them, when the forms are very similar, there's gonna be one guideline for the general application, and then there's gonna be specific sections which might not apply to the form you're using. So if you ever have questions, I recommend first that you go there to get a base level of understanding and to frame the question that you want to call me with instead of just real estate Google Justin. Because you're not going to understand the answer I give you as much unless you do some of that research yourself. So, does everybody have access to a standard agreement of form rather than me jockey back and forth with a screen share? You should all have information handy for a standard agreement, right? Or would it be helpful for me to share it? Democratic process is fine. Do you want me to share it? I'll share it. Fine. Does everybody see my dot loop? Yes, I'm seeing my dot loop. Okay, so here is your consumer's guide to the agreement of sale. Whoops. I'm sorry, that's your standard agreement guidelines for preparation and use. MJ mentioned the consumer's guide to the agreement of sale. This is super helpful. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about this year is we kind of reestablish ourselves in the business and kind of get ready to launch into what could be another kind of a reinvigorated market. Is I want to emphasize a return to professionalism for each and every one of us so we can set ourselves apart from the competition. A big part of that is going to be managing expectations. How do we manage expectations? Give people the information they need to answer their questions before they ask them. That's a big part of it. And then we're going to tell them what questions they might have had and that we already gave them the answer for it. We just keep on reinforcing our professionalism, building the foundation brick by brick so that they wouldn't even dream of trying this process without us. If you send them the consumer guide to the agreement of sale, you put down like 5 bricks at once. It's going to go through the consumer notice. It's going to go through 48 pages of lingo or jargon. It's going to tell them what they need to know or expect about making an offer, negotiation, what the buyer needs to keep in mind, who's involved, what we should know about the property. There's so many things here. And I'm not saying we want to be fear merchants, but this is an intimidating process, right? And this document itself can introduce a lot of things that your consumer never even thought of. And this is the reason that we exist, to help people walk through what can be a frustrating and overwhelming process. Is this something that we invented, this process? No, it's evolved around us. These are government regulations that exist in many cases, like zoning, use, occupancy, codes as far as electric, plumbing, the size of the home that can be built, what a property can be used for. That's not something we created to be complicated to, guarantee ourselves a job. Those are things that exist out in the world and that we have taken the time and the effort to become familiar with so that we can walk people through this process. Can everybody still hear me at home? Good.
Yes.
Why do we talk about fixtures and personal property? Because somebody got sued about it. Somebody got sued over fixtures and personal property. Why do we talk about financing and mortgage contingencies? Because it's a complicated process. Why do we have professional partners? Because it's such a highly variable process, and the level of competency within that field varies so much that we don't know who we're getting. So you might as well use somebody who has established themselves as a professional that you can trust. They know how you zig, you know how they zag, you know the questions that they're going to ask, and you know what information to get to them. For example, many professionals in this industry want nothing to do with online lenders. Are online lenders people too? No, they're not, according to Angie. But yeah, they are. The problem is we don't know what we're getting. If I knew Bob the mortgage guy from Rocket firsthand, if I grew up down the street from him in Detroit, Michigan, I would know that he's a good person and that I can trust him. The problem is there's a team of 100,000 mortgage loan officers at Quicken or Rocket, and I don't know which one I'm getting. Deal with known quantities, and that's gonna save you a lot of problems at the 11th hour. And the known quantities are the team that are existing around you, the people that you've worked with in the past. And that have an established relationship with other members of your team. That's enough about the guidelines. Let me get out of here. And on to the actual standard agreement. So a lot of people kind of refer to this as the part that doesn't matter, right? These are just things that fill up the first page. But the first page is so super important because this is the cover sheet that binds everybody together from the first note of this to the last. And you are the conductor. And we want to make sure that everybody's playing together off the same sheet of music. And this is what makes sure that we're all working together. And everything I'm going to talk about has been something that has cropped up and screwed us up coming down the home stretch. So, starting with line 1, buyers. Have we ever had a disagreement between the name that was on the contract and the actual legal name of the person buying the property, Angie?
Yes.
Okay. Have we ever had a disagreement with the name of the person on the contract under the seller side and the person who was actually selling the property? Or had the right to convey interest in this property? Yeah. What are some examples that might come up that don't seem so super important, but could really that show up more often than any other on the seller side?
A POA?
POA,
Executors.
executors, estates. On the buyer side, LLCs, trusts, other persons under the law, but they are, they're entities, but they're not real people. And that always causes problems. By having an established relationship with your title company, if you see any letters other than junior, senior, the third, after a name, then you're going to want to talk to your title company, buyer or seller, about what documentation you're going to need. Give Sarah, Brandy a call and say, what's going on? What do I need? What documentation? And we've done training on this, what documents you need, but we're going to be happy to refresh you. Just if there's anything I can get you guys to recognize is I want there to be something sticking in your brain that whenever you read it in real life, a little red flag goes up or a little bell dings that says, I should get more information. Be curious always whenever doing stuff. Our mailing address is important. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Go ahead and cover your hump and put them in there. What about this information here? When identifying the property, super, super important, because when this contract goes to the lender, they're going to feed it into their pipeline, and then a bunch of people are going to start working on it. It's not just Angie or Micah.
And the appraiser.
Right.
If his parcel number doesn't match your contract, then we have to send the contract or appraisal back for revisions.
Right. We are, like I like to refer to it, the conductors of the symphony, right? And then we have our lenders who they're going to distribute this to their team. It's going to go to an underwriter. It's going to go to an appraiser. This is going to make its way through county government, state government for taxation. And if all of this stuff isn't right, it can cause you issues. What issues am I talking about? Address, seemingly very simple and straightforward. However, I think Sarah told me that 20% of properties have probably once been known by another address. Can you believe that? Well, in the early 2000s, 911 restructured. As technology advanced, they recognized that there might be more than 7 or more than 25 circle drives in Cumberland County, or Creek Road, or Mountain Road. And what they did was make it that that there had to be a unique address identifier for 911 purposes, so that the fire truck didn't go to the wrong house, or the ambulance didn't go rescue the wrong person, or the SWAT team didn't show up at the wrong place. So what is now 75 Creek Road might have been 10 Creek Road, or what is 452 Mountain Road might have one time been something else. So what shows up at the post office might be different than what appears in the deed. And what do we do if we see a discrepancy there? Say something to somebody and get more information. Talk to your title person, talk to the post office. The time to work this out is on day 1 of the contract, not day 30 of 30. Whenever you're trying to get the power bill switched and the buyer is flipping out because they think they're not getting the house they paid for. Because what's the scary part? The fear of the unknown. And to somebody who hasn't come across this before, it's gonna be a very frightening thing. And we need to put ourselves in their shoes when it comes to those things. In the municipality of. Why is municipality important? Let's take Carlisle, for example. I might have a Carlisle address with a Carlisle zip code, but be in South Middleton Township. And I'm sure that every one of our counties and townships around here has little situations like that, where everybody knows that Carlisle is Carlisle, and that's 17013 or 17015. But I'm actually in a different township, and because I'm in a different township, I'm in a different school district. And could school district influence somebody's willingness to purchase a property? It's probably one of the biggest deal killers out there, right? So make sure that we have the township and the school district correct. County, I really hope that we all know what county we're in, but you know what? We have all these that are on the border. I lived in Shippensburg, which was split up the middle by Cumberland and Franklin, and my front yard was in Cumberland and my backyard was in Franklin. So again,
Then Luzerne and Columbia.
Luzerne and Columbia, raise your hand, get the question, find out. Sometimes we have, school districts, counties, townships, all bisecting one property. And we need to get to the bottom of those. Tax ID. Tax ID is a tricky one because has anybody done a subdivision? Has anybody sold a property with, so that would be one property or multiple properties that share one tax ID. Or you might have one property that is a combination of multiple tax IDs. I want you to put as much information on that tax ID and identification line as you can, especially if you're dealing with raw land, because it might be a portion of tax ID, blah, 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 blah. 2-acre subdivision of blah, 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 blah. Deed book and page that has the physical description of XYZ. And then your tax IDs, you can never go wrong by having more information than you need on those. Where we run into problems is if we have 123 West Main Street, that is the house up front, and then there's a separate parcel behind it, still all identified as 123 Main Street, but there's 2 tax bills. And what happens routinely, and we'll find out here pretty soon when all the tax bills come due, is that somebody didn't have both tax parcels on the agreement of sale. The residence conveyed, but the spare lot behind it did not. So the existing homeowner continues to get the tax bill. Now who pays the difference? Or we had a case where we had a grumpy homeowner who said, if I still own this property, I'm not selling it. And now we have hoops to jump through to tell them, convey to them that they actually did sell it. It was just a clerical error, blah, blah, blah. But it's not on the contract. This could get pretty sticky. Save yourself a lot of problems. More frustrating than working and not getting a lot of money for the transaction is working and working and working, and you know there's no payday involved. Or you already got paid and you got to go back and do just as much work again because of a simple omission like this. And it puts a lot of people, you know, to work on something that doesn't need to be taken care of. So buyer agency, does anybody have any questions on identifying the parties and the property to the contract? Okie dokie. Buyer's relationship with a PA licensed broker. In most cases, buyer's agent's gonna be filling out this contract. Am I wrong? Am I right? I remember a market where things were a little bit dodgy and there weren't that many buyers out there. So me as a listing agent, I did reverse offers on a regular basis. I filled out the contract and sent it to the buyer. Said, here's what we'll sell you the property for, trying to get them off the fence. But in most cases, you as buyer agents are going to be filling this out. The proper way to fill this out Iron Valley real estate of whatever office you inhabit. Everyone here is of Central PA. Your company license number, your company address, company phone. And if you want to do business in 1986, put in the company fax number. But thank goodness we don't have to fax this stuff anymore. We don't have to fax carbon copies anymore. You are going to be either a buyer agent or a dual agent. In what cases is dual agent going to be filled in? Hint, this is slightly trick. If you represent both the buyer and the seller, you're a dual agent. Yeah. What other situation would you fill out dual agent?
If it's someone from our office.
Yes, if you're writing for somebody from this office, correct. On the other side, 99% of the time, you are going to be buyer agent with designated agency. We are a designated agency shop. That means you work for your client to the exclusion of all others. If Kristen has a client, do I work for, or does anybody else work for that client or just Kristen? Just Kristen. Okay. If Susan has a client, she's not sharing information with Kristen. If Kristen has a client, she's not sharing information with April. That we are protecting our information. We are not sharing it, and we are not talking about our transactions in the office because we have an obligation to protect that. The 1% of the time, well, maybe 5% of the time you're going to be doing dual agency. There's 1% of the time that you're going to do dual agency where you're not representing both parties. And if that's if you're writing on the broker's listing or the broker's writing on your listing, because technically everybody is my client. That means everybody in my office, if we're doing a deal together, we are doing dual agency. You don't have to commit that to memory. I'll tell you about it. If you're writing on my offer, I'll remind you. If you're writing on my property. Now, seller's agent or seller's relationship. Pretty straightforward about the same stuff. The things that are wrinkles here. Transaction licensee. I don't like transaction licensee. You shouldn't like transaction licensee except in a very specific minority of situations. Maybe there's a landlord selling to a tenant. They've already negotiated everything and they want someone to handle the paperwork. You can do that, but you don't represent or advise anyone. You just tell them they missed a signature. Okay? You still have to give them information that they need to fill out that paperwork correctly. The other thing that people stumble across is no business relationship, either on the buyer side or the seller side. Can we have some discussion about what those no business relationship situations might be? Either side, tell me, who might not have a business relationship?
For sale by owner?
For sale by owner, excellent.
They were represented by their attorney when my client was purchasing the property.
For those at home, April took a buyer to a for sale by owner. The seller had their attorney handle things and get them all squared away, make sure that the contract wasn't tilted to the buyer side. Can we think of a situation where you might have a non-represented buyer? April has a situation. Go ahead.
Fell through though. I had the property, I was representing the seller. The seller actually had found a neighbor that was interested in buying it. When we discussed what dual agency looked like, he felt confident, he just wanted to not be represented and have me more so be a transaction licensee, but he didn't want to pay any money.
Okay. And I believe strongly in non-represented buyers. Whenever I represent the seller. I know that seller,
Absolutely.
right? And I have a established relationship with that seller. I owe them my fiduciary duties. And this guy walks off the street and says, I want to buy the house. I've known the guy 5 minutes. It's a slap in my seller's face, in my opinion, to offer that buyer the same fiduciary duties as I have already established with my seller, and things get a little bit sloppy. It doesn't change as I described to this buyer, this guy who walked into my open house. I'll tell him, you just walked into my real estate store. This does not change my duty to deal with you honestly and in good faith, to give you information that's accurate and helpful to you. However, in this situation, I work for the seller. I can prepare the contract for you and I can get this deal to closing. I'm just sure you understand, I don't represent you. However, if you don't buy this property and you want to go on to look at other properties, I'm happy to represent you as your buyer's agent in the future. Now, some people want their own representation. If the seller says it's okay, it's okay. That's what this box at the bottom is for, to make sure that everybody understands that. But this is how I describe it to the parties involved. I work for the seller in this case, and I represent them, and I can help get this deal done. The reason I like it this way is if anything goes sideways, I know where my loyalties lie. As a broker, as an agent, and even as the clients. And if the seller, after having been explained this in that fashion, says it's okay, and the buyer insists upon it, then we can do it. If the seller's not okay with it, then I'm happy to refer this. I don't like dual agency, but I love being the only agent involved in a transaction.
Amen.
Okay, everybody on the page there? We will have this discussion more and more.
Yep.
So. Now, I am going to be a dual agent on both sides. I, as a broker, am going to be the dual agent if you're a dual agent. And if we have a situation that goes sideways, like I can fight on almost any side of a disagreement. I can find a way to represent either side of it. But I'm miserable at fighting against myself. So if this thing goes to mediation, my hands are tied. Because I can't choose one person over another. That's why I really don't like dual agency unless there are two agents involved. Okay? Any questions on page 1? That's the cover sheet. That's what gets everybody on the same page. Or who all is working off of that page as a recap? Agents, your title company, your lender, your appraiser, maybe a surveyor, maybe a home inspector, township. All kinds of people are going to be looking at that for information. So this is where we get to the nitty gritty on the agreement of sale. By this agreement dated whatever day you submit the offer. And the conversation I have with our clients when we get to this part is with you signing this as a buyer, it is an offer. With the seller signing it, it is a contract. But even more than a contract, this is a roadmap to the transaction filled with if-then statements. The ifs aren't going to make sense until the then happens in most cases. So forgive me if I don't go into line by line, word by word detail on some of these if-then statements. I'm going to paraphrase and direct you to where some things happen. This is a roadmap to the transaction in that if it goes sideways, this contract tells us how to get back on track. So it's an offer, then it's a contract, and it's a roadmap. It's an instruction booklet to the transaction. Tells us when we have to do things and how we have to do them. We're going to start with the offer price. Pretty straightforward, right? Usually in US dollars. I have never seen one in anything else, but I suppose it could be. Bitcoin, pesos, purple jelly beans. If everybody agrees to the tender being offered, then that's good.
Stanley Cups.
Stanley Cups. Right, whatever's important. Initial deposit within 5 days, if not specified. Greg Cleland, who joined us. Greg Cleland just joined us. He remembers a day when there wasn't a 5-day grace period. Diane, she remembers you wrote that check and submitted it with your carbon copy of the agreement, and you submitted it that night. You drove it to the seller's house. You submitted that thing.
Yep.
What problems do we have with this 5-day grace period today? Inspections could happen. The mail. So we're going to talk about that. I don't like inspections without a check in my hand. Is it okay to demand that? Absolutely. I believe in it. Because it's so hard to fight for money that you don't have, especially with differing opinions of entitlement to that money. What are some ways to get that money into the appropriate escrow account? Ernest. I don't trust the US mail. I would more likely trust the Pony Express. Or a carrier pigeon. You can hand carry this check. I would even be open to the buyer's broker holding it if it meant that it got into an escrow account in a timely fashion. Because they are governed by Pennsylvania state escrow laws. We'll talk more about escrow in a minute. It is very rare to see, you've got $3 signs here, right? So the first one is the initial deposit. How many people have done deals with secondary deposit being made? Yeah, how about a third deposit? No, I have once on land. And there was different stages of due diligence, and after each one, more deposit was made, and then they were all non-refundable at some point as we moved along. That's a little bit more sophisticated, but it gives you the ability to be flexible in your contract. Here's the part, in an effort to make sure that it was hidden, PAR gave it its own letter, and they made it bold print. All funds paid by buyer, including deposits, will be made by check, cashier's check, or wired funds. All funds paid by buyer within 30 days of settlement, including funds paid at settlement, will be by cashier's check or wired funds. So, what's the important part there? Anything under 30 days needs to be in collected funds. What's collected funds? Certified check, cashier's check, or wire. That means that it's not make-believe. A check written out of your personal checkbook is basically instructions or authorization from the receiving bank to go back to your bank and ask for the money. So I wrote instructions on this check to Iron Valley to take that check to Members First, and then Members First went back to PNC and says, here, I have this authorization to collect this money from you. And they're like, that's cool. We don't have any money. So that means we can't collect the funds. And that's why anything under 30 days has to be actual money, not instructions to release money. Because that whole process that I just described, it does take a while, especially if you're dealing with an out-of-state bank. And if that's a substantial amount of money and it bounces, it could come out of our account. And our margins are pretty slim. If that's like a $25,000 check, now everybody's commission's bouncing, it's just a whole mess. We don't like it. So that's why we're kind of sticklers about it. Deposits, regardless of the format of payment, will be paid in US dollars. This one can't be pesos or jelly beans. This has to be US dollars unless otherwise stated here. I guess everybody could say jelly beans are cool, but they're paid to the broker for seller. Unless. So what are some common things that might be written in there? To be held by buyer's broker? Yeah, we see that. To be held by title company? Yeah, we see that. As long as there's something there to tell us who's holding the money. Because if the state comes and audits us, or worse yet, we get to closing, no one knows where the check is. Yes, that's happened. Where we got to closing, there was nothing written in there. The listing broker, me, goes to the escrow account looking for that, and it's not there. Uh-oh. My pulse goes up. My blood pressure goes up. I start getting snippy. And we find out that a title company has it, and we never knew it. And I feel embarrassed because I didn't know it. And that's not good. What is a concern here if the buyer's agent broker is holding this money? In my opinion, there's no risk. It makes no difference because we're all governed by the same laws, and we have to assume that everybody's playing straight up. The problem comes if a title company is holding it and they don't have an escrow agreement in place. And that escrow agreement in place should state that that money can only be released in accordance with PA escrow laws, meaning both parties have to agree how it's distributed, or you get the final decision from an unappealable court. If it's been given to a title company or an attorney. And because what's the risk there? You know,
They're not governed by us.
right. And, you know, it's in many cases, a much more familiar situation. Joe Tom chose his attorney who his grandfather's been working with to handle the title on his transaction. Joe Tom does or this attorney does all Joe Tom's deals. And he calls him up and says, deal's dead, might as well just go ahead and cut me that escrow check. The attorney doesn't know that there's a dispute to the earnest money. And now we have an issue. Now the legal fees are going up. It's gonna be an issue. So be careful. That's much more pivotal line to the contract than what many people give it credit. Seller assistance. My lender friends. What are the limits to seller assistance these days?
So conventional, 5%, 3%, 5% down, 10%, or 3 and 5% down is 3%, and then 10% or more is 6%.
Under 10%, you can get 3% in help. Over 10% down, you can get up to 6%.
Correct. FHA is 6% unless you're putting 10% down, and then it goes up, shoots up to 9%.
9%. Holy cannoli. I never knew that part.
VA is all of the closing costs and so typically 6%.
6%.
Same with USDA, although USDA allows you to finance 1% of the closing costs. So
Okay. All right. So as we move forward in this brave new world where commissions may be treated a little bit differently, and we don't know yet, seller help might be one mechanism by which we get buyer agency commission addressed. Am I correct? You think that that's a likelihood?
I think it's going to be a lot of white noise, but I think once it comes down to it, I think seller's help is the first reasonable option.
Yeah, right. And I think you're right about the white noise. Everybody's freaking out right now. Just like if you were alive in the business when Trid and the Alta came out, everybody flipped out. That's it. I'm done. I'm moving to Canada. I quit. Screw this job. And then like one day to the next, nobody missed the beat. It was absolutely a non-issue. It was just everybody flipping out. Just kind of like the Y2K bug. Settlement date. Settlement date is, pick one. Pick a date. Somebody.
January 10th.
January 10th. What happens if we want to close on January 9th?
You can't, but
You can. Absolutely you can. Do you need an addendum to close on January 9th?
no.
Is it my internet or this? Off? All right, I'm a teacher, so let me take over until he gets back. Except that I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe the snow knocked out their signal or something.
Possibly.
Okay, so it's not just me. All right, good news.
It's not just you. I thought it was me.
Now the party's going on with us only.
Do they realize we're no longer there?
Nope.
It's possible that he's continuing with those that are in attendance.
So we make our own party, right?
That's right.
Yep,
We're the cool kids.
that's right. Oh, he's back.
Guys, I got knocked off too.
Repeat everything you said in the last 5 minutes.
He's still connecting.
Oh, he is.
He's talking though, but we can't hear him. He's not, his audio is not connected.
Is he driving?
Sorry,
too?
everybody. Everybody still there?
Hello.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Had some technical difficulties. There was like a meteor.
Welcome
Start
back.
Start all over.
Okay, so
Okay.
going back to the agreement of sale here. So we have a settlement date of January 10th. We want to close on January 9th. Do we need a contract to change that or a change in terms addendum? No, we don't. Is it advisable? I don't know. I really don't think so. Unless you're changing a substantial chunk of time, like from January 10th of 2025 to August of 2024. I really don't know that it's necessary. But if you want to make a substantial change that you can hold people accountable for, then get that change in terms. If you are just doing it because it's expedient and convenient and it works for everybody, I say roll with the contract as it's printed and don't do that change. Everybody seeing the contract? Can't hear you.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. At the time of settlement, the following will be prorated on a daily basis between buyer and seller, reimbursing where applicable. What's prorated mean? Right, and
Yeah.
prorated on a daily basis until what? Seller will pay up to and including the day of settlement, and the buyer will pay for all days following settlement. So you pay up to and including the day that you own it. As a buyer, you pay from the following day into eternity until you sell it. That way, everybody pays for what they got. That's taxes, that's utilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Has anybody had any issues with that?
Justin, I don't, but I have a question here.
Yes.
As a newbie, I am not sure who decides on the settlement date.
The settlement date is traditionally proposed by the buyer and then agreed to by the seller. And proposed to by the buyer in cooperation with the bank, because usually the quickest you can get that done, Joseph, is 30 days is a practical working time frame where everybody's not losing their minds. Anything faster than that, you're really rushing. And the more you rush, the more you allow for mistakes to be introduced to the process, whether that's with home inspections, appraisals, and I think it just stresses everybody out. It really just gets people stressed out, especially if it's an occupied property where sellers have to move and buyers have to coordinate inspections, appraisals, applications, utilities. Everybody just gets really tense. So anything less than 30 days in typical situation isn't advisable. Now, if you go over 60 days, you're usually, as a buyer, going to be paying things like a rate lock extension. And those rate lock extensions, the bank is going to charge you to lock in your interest rate beyond that 60-day horizon. When crystal balls start to get fuzzy, we don't know what interest rates are going to do. Is that pretty accurate? That you're paying for a rate lock beyond 60 days or sometimes beyond 30? Okay, so if we have to extend it, you have to pay more but usually you're dealing with closing within a 30 to 60-day window unless there's special occupancy requirements by the buyer or seller. So, good question, Joseph.
Thank you.
Settlement date and all other dates and times identified. Wait, I skipped ahead. Conveyance from seller will be by fee simple deed of special warranty unless otherwise stated here. What are some exceptions there? Bank-owned properties, sheriff sales. Special warranty is the deed where the seller warrants that there's no title defects arising during the period of their ownership. A general warranty goes back and guarantees that there's no title defects whatsoever. That's a higher standard that requires more work, and it's typically overkill. So special warranty is the standard.
It's also how you win bar bets,
And that's,
because that language came from the Magna Carta.
that language came from the Magna Carta, according to MJ. Thank you. Payment or transfer of taxes or payment of transfer taxes will be divided equally between buyer and seller unless otherwise stated here. We are all most familiar with this arrangement as 1% to the buyer and 1% to the seller. I believe it's 1% to the state, or 0.5% to the state, and then the other 0.5% on each side is developed or divided between the township and municipality. You don't need to know all those details typically, but it's 1% to the buyer and 1% to the seller in all of our marketplace. There are other markets within the state of Pennsylvania where there are additional transfer taxes. Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, bigger cities. I think Reading, some places in Berks County have additional transfer taxes. This is one of those situations where it pays to stay in your lane and know the area that you serve. Whenever you go too far out of your area of, influence, they sneak things in on you that might trip you up. Like transfer tax. I've seen people get bitten on that before. Some situations where that might not be divided evenly. Buyer agrees to pay the seller's half to make their contract more appealing. That's not a bad deal for the buyer. That's a tax deductible expense, I believe, because it's a tax. Also, it's not going to influence the appraisal. Sometimes banks and builders will insist that the buyer pay it too. It's less voluntary. Possession is to be delivered by deed, existing keys and physical. I love that, existing keys. So if there's no keys, you're cool. If there's one key, that's fine. Just existing keys. The seller's not going to be obliged to go out and make additional copies. Physical possession to a vacant property free of debris with all structures broom clean at day and time of settlement. Unless seller, before signing this agreement, has identified in writing that the property is subject to a lease. There is so much information in that one line. And so many disputes come back to that one line. So it's being delivered by deed, existing keys, and physical possession of the property, free of debris. That means no chunks. With all structures broom clean. Carpets don't have to be professionally clean, but still no chunks. At day and time of settlement. How many days after closing do I have to move? None. You're supposed to be out at the day and time of settlement. With no stuff in the property. No bookshelves, no cans of paint, no animals, Unless these things are worked out in advance. I'm sure we all have horror stories, and the more contentious the transaction gets, the more chunks will be left behind in that house. The more debris, the more stuff, the more bookshelves, the more things. So be aware of that. If the seller has identified in writing that the property is subject to a lease or short-term rental agreement, possession is to be delivered by deed, existing keys, and assignment of existing leases and short-term rental agreements for the property, together with security deposits and interest, if any, at day and time of settlement. Seller will not enter into any new leases or short-term rental agreements, nor extend existing leases or short-term rental agreements for the property without the written consent of the buyer. How do we assign these leases? The buyer will acknowledge the existing leases by initialing them at the execution of this agreement unless otherwise stated in this agreement. Another great way to make sure that this information is conveyed is what? I know somebody at home has used a tenant occupied property addendum. Okay.
So if you have a listing that is tenant occupied, but they're gonna be out before it settles, as me as a buyer agent, should I have that?
So if we are selling a property that is currently tenant occupied, but is going to be vacant at the time of closing, you don't need to have a tenant occupied property addendum because possession is to be delivered by deed. And it is not subject to a lease.
What if the tenant will not move out because, you know, whatever? Let's say the seller wasn't honest about the
That
tenant
is a very
paying rent.
specific situation. We can take that up offline.
Okay, nothing
No.
urgent. I was just wondering if that will still apply with the tenant.
Yeah, that's you need to call the sheriff
Okay.
or the constable.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, if the property wouldn't, if the tenant wouldn't vacate, you should delay closing until that's correct. Because the tenant's worse than debris. Now, last thing, date and time is of the essence. I need to wrap up here in the next couple minutes because time is of the essence. But that's a legal term. That means the date and time are essential to the contract. They are important. And the way I describe it to my buyers is that if they don't meet the appropriate deadlines, then they're going to lose the right to negotiate on that basis. And that typically means the right, you know, they could lose the right to money. Written acceptance of all parties on or before whatever date. The settlement date and all other times identified for the performance of any obligations of this agreement are of the essence and are binding. And all changes to this agreement should be initialed and dated after your contract is together and you have an executed agreement. All changes in the future should be done by a change in terms addendum. Otherwise, you're going to be extending the execution date and you could screw some stuff up. Right? So if we have a contract that is executed on January 4th, and then we make a change of any kind 2 weeks later, we make that change on the 18th. Now all your timelines begin on the 18th. Like it or not, that's the execution date. However, if you do a change in terms addendum to extend or change whatever details you have to adjust because they happen, that does not extend your execution date.
I have a question about that.
Okay,
So say you have what you believe to be an executed agreement
yes,
yesterday, and now today you realize, oh, we do need to make a little change here. We'll just have everybody change it, everybody initial it.
now your execution date is.
Today, yeah. Yeah. All right, well, that is what I have. Any wrap-up questions on those topics? Next time we'll get into some of the other fun stuff like zoning and personal property, and then the real nitty-gritty financing. Anybody, anything?
Can I add? If the seller doesn't complete their information on page 1,
Yes.
how do you handle it?
If the seller does not complete their information on page 1, as far as
Designated agency, that kind of stuff. Because
that's a cooperative thing. I assume that everybody is a designated agent unless I have been notified otherwise by Buzzwolf. that they are not a designated agency shop. There are still several shops out there that are old school and are not designated agent. And there's a few of them out there, but I assume that just about everybody, because I've worked with everybody enough that I know that the big box brokerages are designated agency. It's usually the mom and pop old school brokers that are not designated agency, and that can be handled with a text or a phone call. Hey, how do you want me to fill this out? Or direct their attention to it. Well, I appreciate you all. Thank you for your attention. And see you next time. Stay tuned. We'll do some more of these pop-ups. Appreciate ya. Have a great one.
Thank you.
See ya. Bye, Joseph.